She's April.
And she's Molly.
And we are
the Book Besties. Now you have justified incest.
All roads lead back to the whore.
She's more of an object than she is a main character.
I definitely got a vibe he has molested a corpse or two.
Oh, I forgot that murder fixes that problem.
Hi, I'll be your guide. Your GUIDE to the other side.
I'm not a murderer. I feel like I need to do it again.
Oh, so it's good to see your face. I was concerned. Your husband texted me.
Yeah, so my phone sucks. I need a new phone. It's quite old, and it died while we were at lunch. It died at noon. Like, it's not battery power, man.
Rude. Well, okay, so he texts, he goes, April's on her way home, and I go, okay, no rush. Her phone is dead, and we drove separately, so if she doesn't show up, she's dead in a ditch somewhere. I go, if so, how do you feel about filling in? And he goes, I have not read the book. I will read the first and last pages of each chapter and see you tonight. I go, glad we have a backup plan.
Okay. A few things. Number one, the children were with me. So his concern for me being dead in a ditch, the kids are with me, no big deal. Second, if I actually were dead in a ditch, his plan was to still go on with you and not grieve the loss of his wife and children.
We obviously have a business deal to run. So we'll grieve after recording.
Man, I see where I rank.
It shows how much we love you that we're going to continue on in your memory and keep doing a thing you love very much.
Is that what it was? Because it doesn't.
To me, it was.
It doesn't feel like that. Can I give that a?
Sure. Oh, I gotta find mine. I'm back upstairs in my old office.
Yeah, you're in a new space today.
I'm in a new space. I mean, I still got my favorite background, but
yeah,
it's just mine. Like, there's a door and everything.
Space. Wow.
Like,
I'm in the same space. Got my pink wall. Living large.
We're living large. Mm-hmm. So this week, Tess Gerritsen, Bone Garden.
Yes. I don't have a copy of it because I listened to the audiobook on Audible, not sponsored, but thank you, Molly, for letting me borrow it. I couldn't find it on any of the library apps that the two library systems I use. Well, neither of them had it as an audiobook. And the CD player in my car, because I have a car old enough to have a CD player, it's not working. So I couldn't borrow it that way either. I did borrow the physical book from the library, but just was going to run out of time to read it, so I did the audiobook. And I'm glad, because I have to say, the narrator, chef's kiss.
Right. She was fantastic.
She's fantastic. There's a lot of characters to keep track of in this book.
I wrote a list.
Yeah, I did too. That's so funny.
Because I had to keep track.
Yeah, that's what I did too.
I wrote a list.
But she has a different voice for each of them, which I think is great. Like, she's definitely a narrator. I would look for an audiobook by her and read another. So,
she's no, I lost my train of thought. She's good though. She's very good.
Were you going to say Jim Dale?
No, I was thinking Jennifer Ikeda, who does Discovery of Witches.
And I didn't really think she was that great.
You shut your mouth.
I'm sorry. Sorry. Blasphemous.
So it's the end of spooky season for us here.
Last week of October.
It's always spooky season in my heart, but
you look like Beetlejuice today. So.
That was the goal. I started singing, "Hi, I'll be your guide. Your GUIDE to the other side." And
Molly.
It's a musical now.
I know it is.
And I felt that impression was pretty spot on. Thanks very much.
Yeah, the Beetlejuice musical is one of the Broadway COVID tragedies. Like, I don't think it really got a full run, and then they ended up just closing it because
which is sad.
Yeah.
Which I will go see it if you get it running again. I would love to see it. Okay, so synopsis.
Yeah, go ahead.
This book, part thriller, part historical fiction, part horror, part medical dramas, is The Bone Gardens.
I don't know that I would agree with the horror category, but I agree with all those other ones.
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
But The Bone Gardens definitely fits into spooky season with all these little beautiful parts. So we start in modern day, where we meet Julia, a divorcee who is using her summer break to start a garden in a home she bought for herself after the divorce. While digging, she discovers bones in her garden. Then we flash back to 1830, where we meet Rose Connolly and Norris Marshall. She's 16, 17, and has just lost her sister, and he is a medical student at Harvard. Their paths keep crossing as the West End Reaper...
Not at Harvard, at Boston Medical College.
Sorry. My bad. Their paths keep crossing as the West End Reaper has somehow gotten both of them in their sights. The story bounces back and forth between their timeline and Julia's timeline until we come to a point at the end where we will learn how the stories intersect.
Yeah.
Oh boy. So I have a quick note. I copied and pasted in my notes Tess Gerritsen's bio, because she is just so, like, wow. Between the historical stuff and the medical stuff, I was just wow.
Well, she writes the Risley and Isles series, and Isles has a cameo in this book. This book is not a part of that series, but she does have a cameo in it.
She did her undergrad at Stanford. She went to med school at University of California, San Francisco, and that's where she got her MD.
She has her MD?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
She was a working physician when she became a writer, and her first novel came out in 1987. Call Me After Midnight, a romantic thriller it was. And then after that, she wrote a screenplay in 1993 for CBS Movies called Adrift. I don't remember that. It starred Kate Jackson. But then her first medical thriller came out in 1996. And then after that, it just started rolling. And that's when she retired from medicine, when she started making a living on the writing. She has won several awards. The Neuro Wolf Award, the Rita Award, and lots of praise from big deal, like, in publishing. She's also got accolades in filmmaking, I guess, and she lives in Maine. I just thought it was really interesting how she took the time to go to med school, and she's like, you know what? Fuck that shit. I'm gonna write.
I don't know why, but that whole bio made me think of the episode of Grey's Anatomy when Christina Yang says double doctors don't go to second-rate medical schools or something like that. And I don't know why, because she's not a double doctor, but I just kept double doctors.
So, let's dive in, shall we?
We shall.
So I want to first start off with saying, wow. So many characters.
There's a lot of characters.
So many characters. And I normally struggle to keep track of when there's this many characters in a book.
Yeah.
But I feel like Tess, the author, and the I don't know the audiobook narrator's name.
Yeah.
But I'll put it in the link in the bio. But they did such a fantastic job of keeping each voice.
Yeah, and I felt like even though the names were appropriate for the time, they were also different, that I was able to keep track that way. Yeah. It was smart writing.
It was very smart writing.
I feel like I get it. I get the whole, like, Julia business, and it helps tie into her Rizzoli and Isles, but I just kind of felt like that part of the story was unnecessary. Like, I could have read the whole book taking place in the 1830s, and that's for this book.
You feel like Julia's storyline's unnecessary.
I don't think it matters. Yeah, I don't. I am not a big reader of historical fiction. I've read a few that I like, but it's not really my jam. It's not my genre. When I was younger, I went through this phase where I really liked reading like um, Holocaust lit, which is morbid. I don't get it, but I did. I think
Okay.
I first like read Number of the Stars, and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
like hooked me in.
Right.
Um, but like historical fiction isn't like really the thing that I gravitate towards. But in this particular book, I feel like there could have been so much more of that. Like I would have liked to just live in the 1830s of this book, and
I feel like we got a lot of history though from this book.
oh my gosh, we did. And I feel like the medical history in it was just so fascinating. And
Right.
I absolutely love that one of the main characters in this book is Oliver
Oliver
Wendell
Wendell
Holmes.
Holmes. Like,
Yeah, so I mean, I mean, there were so many throwbacks to like things that people of the time were doing. So
right.
they even
The poetry, talking about
they
like
talk poetry. They talk about that up and coming writer Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now I can't stand the Scarlet Letter. It's like I hate it.
it's
It's garbage. I hate
it's
it so much.
awful. It's a
But
hard read. Period.
and I think I blame English teachers for this. They like beat the symbolism out of you in that
Right.
book. And um anyway, so but it's so interesting because it like, brings in that,
Mm-hmm.
this is actually what was happening at the time. I had never heard of childbed fever.
Which I went down the rabbit hole on, and I have a whole section about. So
Oh,
I
okay.
want to
Well,
talk about it.
I'll hold back on that. But yeah, I feel like I could have lived in the 1830s in this book. Like, not like actually lived there. Like, I want the more of the 1830s and less of the present day
Oh, I
story.
liked it. I think we get more of the reasoning at the end. Why
I,
we have the
yeah, but I
two?
thought that was kind of a cop out. Like,
Really?
I feel like
You thought it was lazy writing?
yes, I did. I feel like this was a way for her to connect to an existing fan base with the
Mhm.
Rizzolian Isles. Because, we talked about this with Emily Giffen. She
Yeah.
reused a lot of her characters in all of her books. And so, if you're a fan of the Something Borrowed series, then you might end up reading Baby Proof because you know that Rachel
Yeah,
and Dex
and
make
that's
an
are in
appearance
there.
in it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's where that came instead of just living in that, like letting that book just breathe and live and
Be on its
exist in the
own.
1830s.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I did like the book. I was surprised because I actually texted you shortly after I started it. And I was
I
like,
was
okay,
shocked you liked it.
okay, this one is like legit scary. I'm like afraid because I'm home in my shower and I'm scared. Okay. But I did like it. And texted our good friend Nurse Katie and told her
Which we
she should
should
read it.
which we should have definitely had Nurse Katie on at least for a portion of this so we could have talked about the medical history because this stuff is wild.
Yeah. Well, I am interested to hear what she has to say. So maybe we'll
Do a bonus episode or something.
or just tell you all next week after we've
Yeah.
talked to
What Katie says.
Yeah.
Have her record a video note or something.
She probably would.
Um,
Anyway, I'm sorry. I went on a tangent, but
that's
those are my
okay.
thoughts on this book. Yeah, that's my biggest criticism is that like I don't even mind books that like jump timelines, but I just felt like this one didn't need it.
Didn't need it. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So do you think this book has multiple main characters or just one?
Well, I mean, I think you can make the argument that the main characters in the book are Norris and Rose
Mm-hmm.
and Julia and I mean, I guess Tom, but I think we're supposed to think it's Henry.
I don't know. It feels like I don't know. I felt like I never got a grasp on who we're supposed to be paying attention to the most.
And see, that's what I mean by it could have just let it exist in the 1830s because to me, the main character of all of this is Rose. I mean, even in the present day where Julia and Henry and Tom are trying to learn the history of Julia's house, they're learning about Rose.
Right.
So you could argue that Rose is the main character.
Right.
What do you think?
I want to think Rose is the main character,
Uh-huh.
but I feel like since we started out in Julia's timeline and Julia
Mm-hmm.
is our main driving voice, she
Mm-hmm.
is the intended main character. Is she the main character? I don't think so. If anyone gives me main character energy, it's Meggie. That baby is the center point of that book.
I mean, that's an interesting point because the letters that we read, that Julia and Henry are reading, that are from
Oliver Wendell Holmes,
they are written to Meggie. But I think it's hard to make her the main character because we only actually see her in the book, like for maybe a couple of pages.
Yeah.
Well, and only for a couple of pages. It's like, okay, she's born. Her mom dies of childbed fever. Rose is now raising her. And then the few times that she visits her at the nursery with the wet nurse, like that's really the gist of
But Maggie's. We're talking about her the whole time. They're talking about her in the past. They're talking about in their present. Everything that's happening,
But it could be anything. I feel like it doesn't have to be a person. Like it could have been about the necklace, or it could have been like she's more of an object than she is a main character.
Okay. I think we'll agree to disagree on this one.
It's not like that's never happened before.
Or it'll happen again.
Right.
So we talked about Isles. Do you think she brought that in as like a tongue-in-cheek nod to her other books? Or do you think she's like, you know what? I need this to get people to read this book?
Probably both. I think I'm not a writer in the way that you're a writer. I'm a writer in that I say I'm a writer and I don't work on a book for 8 years. And then I'm like, oh, but I have this book that I have written 2 chapters of. So I'm not a writer like you are. But I think that there is some comfort in knowing your characters completely. And she knows Dr. Isles. She knows her. Right. I don't know Tess's whole story, but I'm guessing that there's characteristics of that doctor that are a part of her.
Right.
And so I think it's a nod to the familiarity for her, but also you've got a built-in fan base.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
why don't milk that cow?
Authors do this all the time. Not just Emily Giffin. You can make the argument that that's why
Jasmine Gillian, The Wedding Date, that book is the first book in a series where the leads in The Wedding Date are friends with the people in the next book, and then the next book's connected to the next book, and so on and so forth.
Well, there's a series that's like, the first one I think is called, nope, I can't remember what the first one's called. There's one called Beauty and the Geek, and it's a whole like series of books that are like modern day Geekerella. That's the first one, and the characters keep reappearing, and then their modern day takes on fairy tales. They're actually pretty decent, and I mean, you get spin-off series all the time. I mean, Suzanne Collins wrote the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, as a prequel to the Hunger Games, and then laid so thickly in there the symbolism that this is a relative of Katniss. It's a complete throwback, you know? So I can see both sides of it.
So let's move on to Wall-Eyed Jack.
Okay, hang on. Let me clarify who that is, because I think, is that the grave robber guy?
Yes. Yes.
My notes literally say the grave robber guy, because I could not for the life of me remember his name.
Wall-Eyed Jack, because, they don't know where to look when they're talking to him.
Oh, that's what that means.
So he calls himself a resurrectionist, but that doesn't make what he's doing anything less gross. Right. And I get this vibe.
He's a grave robber.
Right. Bottom line, he's a grave robber. He calls himself a resurrectionist. But the way he talks to Norris about like one of the bodies, I definitely got a vibe he has molested a corpse or two, and it just makes the character even more creepy. Like, this guy is gross, right? Yeah. So I want to talk about him for a little bit.
His long-term goal, like his life's goal, is to save up enough money that he's like, not, his body cannot be stolen. He's going to be completely like cemented all the way in.
He's got a cage, and he's going to be cemented in, and he's going to have a watcher for the first 30 days, so that by the time that his body is rotted, that nobody can take it.
So that tells me that what he is doing in his profession grosses him out a lot too. Like he doesn't want people like him taking his body.
Well, but it's not about taking the body that bothers him. It's the anatomist.
Right.
It's being cut open and being examined and being treated as this object of ogling.
And people don't necessarily realize this, and this is one of the things I enjoy that the book went into. They don't necessarily realize that when medicine was still in its infancy, and I don't know if I can even call the 1800s its infancy, but modern medicine, I guess.
Yeah. The start of modern medicine, yeah.
Right. There weren't people like donating their body to science.
No.
That's not what was happening. So medical colleges were paying students, they were paying resurrectionists to literally go and steal corpses out of the grave.
Yep.
Yeah. So that they had specimens to examine. And as we learned from Walleye Jack, they weren't even above murdering people so that they would have.
Walleye Jack. I got a question about that. But
okay.
Well, in the story we learned that it's legal for them to ship them from New York, and in the South it was illegal for them to have bodies given off for science. But Boston, being a more Catholic and more religious colony, air quote, it was, frowned upon a lot more to do something like that.
Well, so I'm not sure how Catholic at the time Boston was.
Protestant, maybe?
Well, yeah, but it seems like anyone who was Catholic was Irish, and they were really discriminated against.
Oh, so, hell yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if you know this, but if you are Catholic, you have to be buried within 3 days of dying, and you have to be buried in consecrated ground. That is one of their beliefs that is a part of your faith and how you have an afterlife in heaven.
Yeah.
And so, they definitely would not have wanted that. So, Rose's sister, I forgot her name.
Arnia.
Jack actually steals Arnia's body, which
right from the freaking
of all the
porch of the freaking
right. But of all the ones that were there, he just randomly selected Arnia's, whatever. But Arnia's never buried then. So because
what happened to her body?
Because of her beliefs, then if Rose would have known the truth, I mean, that would have been horrific.
Devastating.
Norris never tells her.
No, but they had other problems.
They did. That is accurate.
I think Jack got his just desserts in the end though, because he gets caught. I'm not going to get to the spoiler part of that. He gets caught in the end, and he goes to jail, and he knows he's going to get hanged. And guess what happens to criminals who are hung?
They are
dissected. They go to the unanimous table.
Yeah. And I know we're going to probably talk about who he's convicted of killing in the end, but he's not solely responsible for that murder, but he definitely murdered people in the book.
Yeah, so. He was definitely a bad dude.
He definitely was not good.
I have a note about it, but we'll jump into it now since we're talking about it. Him and his wife killing the patrons.
Yeah.
Is he doesn't
killed two, I think.
Right. Well, one was already dead.
Yeah, they kill one and one's already dead. Yeah, that's
But I have a feeling they were just showing a few. Yeah. One, the sailor, but I feel like that's happened more than once.
Right.
So I'm going to jump into a question about symbolism. Okay. Rose and Julia are both the youngest siblings. We meet Julia's older sister who comes to tell her the bad news about her ex-husband. We meet, the whole reason Rose came to the States was to be with Arnia. Do you think there's the author's using some sort of symbolism here early on, making both both our main characters, I'm going to air quote that, being the youngest siblings?
I mean, I think that's a little far-fetched. I mean, sure, whatever. But I kind of think I don't think their lives aligned that much that, spoiler, they're basically the same person. I don't, when they kind of made that, the twist at the end, I was like, what? No.
Good. I can't wait to hear what you say about that, because I have a couple questions about it. So moving on. So, in the first few chapters, Arnia dies. It's very sad. It's heartbreaking.
Arnia dies,
and then Arnia ends up on the anonymous table, and she is being autopsied for class. It is traumatizing for everyone in the room. Even later on, we learned that it was traumatizing for Dr. Grenville, right? Like, everyone was upset. Yeah, right? So,
yeah.
I feel like I, as a reader, was traumatized by that scene. It was upsetting for me. It hurt my heart. How did you feel about that scene?
Well, I mean, as we've already established in previous episodes, I don't do well with ick, and that is quite ick. I texted
It was very
yeah,
graphic and realistic.
I texted our friend Nurse Katie to ask her if in nursing school, and because Katie is a nurse practitioner, like if she had to also do dissections the way that they do in medical school, because I mean, essentially a nurse practitioner is the doctor. I mean, they don't have the same title, but she can prescribe meds. She has her own patients, like, you know.
Right.
So anyway, so I think here's the weird thing. I kept thinking about the show Bones because I love that show. As much as I don't like gross things, I love that show Bones. And so it kind of made me think about that. What I really liked from this was how through the letters, Tom and Julia were discovering that was, I mean, this is fiction based, but that was where Oliver Wendell Holmes first started thinking that
big picture.
What was happening was actually that the doctors were spreading the issue. And so what was so gross about the autopsy was that childbed fever essentially is an infection in the uterus that women are getting after giving birth. And I don't know if you have a note about this, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but the doctors were examining the women who are all in the same ward, lying next to each other, without washing their hands in between, and they weren't using gloves because we're in the 1830s and that wasn't a thing. So by the time they got to Arnia, she was the last patient, and they just wiped their hands on a towel because of the blood and gick that are in it. So basically, they're taking the infection from one person and literally putting it in another person's vagina. So when Arnie... Sorry, go ahead.
So I was in my readings. I have a link I'm going to share, and I'm going to read a thing from the book. They were going from the anatomy table straight into treating patients.
Yes.
So they weren't even washing their hands. So the bacteria from dead bodies was going right into a woman's uterus.
Right.
This is why.
And then we see that actually play out with Charlie, who cuts himself while he's dissecting Arnia and ends up getting a massive infection and has to have his arm amputated. So a lot of the horror of what was happening in that dissection scene of Arnia was they had already established a relationship with her because they knew her sister and they knew her from the ward. So that was one thing. Number two, like they describe the way childbed fever is like a massive infection that smells bad. And so like
rancid.
Gross. Yeah. And I mean, you and I have both given birth. So there's a lot of like,
I totally would have died.
There's a lot of stuff that has to come out of your body after. Yeah. So it's already really gross. So, yeah. So the part of it that was fascinating to me was like them realizing, oh, like we're doing this. We're making these women sick.
Right.
They were surviving if they were at home giving birth.
Right. Right. And one doctor says the reason that the Irish aren't getting sick was, he said in the book, they're a hardier stock when they're hardier stock because they have to, because of the poverty, right? Because they're So, which was false.
Well, and there's lovely stereotypes about Irish families, right?
Right.
That they're always really large and...
Which was false because they are hardier stock, but the reason they were not dying was because they weren't going to the hospital because they couldn't afford it.
Right,
So,
they weren't going to the hospital.
So since we're talking about this...
wait, one second,
sorry.
though. I want to just say that it is a perfect example of, like, men in a position of power deciding that what is happening to women is a fault of their own. You know what I mean?
Right. Oh my God. Yeah. They blamed the women.
The men were causing the problem.
That is the worst mansplaining of all time.
So is.
So since we're talking about this, I'm going to put, this is the link I'm going to talk about is from Dartmouth Medical Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And the title of it is The Most Unspeakable Terror. And it goes on, it's written by 3 doctors. And it goes on to talk about the tragedy of what happens in childbed fever, how they came to discover it. But in the end of the book, she actually has an author's note I'd like to read.
Oh, okay. I didn't get to read the author's note because I did the audiobook, so I'd like to hear it.
My audiobook had it. It didn't have it at the end?
Maybe, and I just didn't do it. Oh. Because I was like, oh, done.
Author's note.
Also possible.
In March 1833, Oliver Wendell Holmes left Boston and sailed to France, where he would spend the next 2 years completing his medical studies. At the renowned École de Medical, in Paris. Young Holmes had access to unlimited number of anatomy specimens, and he studied under some of the finest medical and scientific minds in the world. He returned to Boston a far more accomplished physician than most of his American peers. In 1843, at Boston Society of Medical Improvement, he presented a paper titled The Contagiousness of Puerile Fever. It would prove to be his greatest contribution to American medicine. It introduces a new practice that now seems obvious, but which in Holmes' days was a radical new idea. Countless lives were saved and miseries avoided by his simple yet revolutionary suggestion that physicians should simply wash their hands.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did hear that in the audiobook. I was thinking while I was listening to that part about how similar that is when COVID first reached the U.S. and in March of 2020.
It's like, wow.
And then there were there were all these studies about how infrequently we actually do wash our hands, and I was like, ew, people are gross.
Right.
Well, and now we have things like hand sanitizer, and a lot of doctors use that when they go in a room, but there are a lot of studies that show that hand sanitizer usage, it desensitizes your hands, and it's actually still much cleaner to just use soap and water.
Yeah. It's just wild. And then, like, the talking about bleeding of people, so in there, they also bleed people to remove infection, which we've learned now in modern day that as well isn't
well, I mean, I don't know that it doesn't work at all. I think it can weaken your immune system, and so, like, therefore it wouldn't help. I mean, Katie's probably going to kill me for this, but I mean, if you have an infection in, like, a sore on your arm, for example, they will cut it open and scrub it out a whole lot,
right,
so that it can heal up. But you are essentially bleeding it. It's just not the same way as, like, let's cut them open and let the blood
just spill out.
Right.
Well, and they were using leeches back then too, which leeches is still used.
They're still used, yeah.
Like to bring blood flow back to the top of the skin, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
but
especially with, like, frostbite.
Right. Right. Which we're talking about the same Grey's Anatomy scene with George, I think.
I totally was picturing that episode with George. That's so funny. Oh, but they really do that. Like, I knew that. It wasn't because of Grey's Anatomy.
Grace just helped me realize things I already knew. Quote me on that. In chapter 14, Norris almost dies, right? The Reaper is, like, right there, and he narrowly escapes, and then becomes what everybody assumes is the Reaper, right?
Yeah, they all accuse him of being the Reaper.
Right.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense that it would have been him. He lived close to where everybody was being murdered.
He had the history. Did you think it was him for a while?
No, and the reason was because I knew it would be a character that we weren't getting.
Expecting.
We weren't getting an inside look into their life.
Right.
I didn't think it was going to be. Am I going to give it away if I?
I have a whole conversation about it planned, but we can talk about it now if you want.
I didn't think it was going to be. What the heck is her name?
Eliza.
Okay, I didn't actually think it was going to be her. I thought it was going to be Charlie.
Oh, okay. That was who I assumed it was originally too. Was Charles?
When Charles. Sorry, when he lost his arm, I was kind of like, oh, okay. Well, maybe
this is really going to cut down on his murdering.
Right. It's going to cut the murder in half because
he's half. I mean, it would have made sense. Being forced to do medicine, even though you don't want to, and so you take it out. I mean, that would make a logical, linear sense.
And the other person I suspected was the head of the Night Watch, not the one that was the dickhead, but the other guy, like the head.
Hold on. I got him. Okay, so Constable Lyons.
Yes, that was the other one I suspected, because he was never around when they needed him.
But we learn later, which I'll jump to that later. So let's jump into chapter 21. Julia has just found Henry unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
And she finally gets him to the hospital, and then we learn that the neighbor with the dog is also the grandnephew.
Right.
So, Tom. Which you couldn't remember his name.
Yes. Side note, listeners, I was texting Molly as I was taking my notes, and I was like, what was the name of the grandnephew that Julia likes? And I'm like, Molly's giving me ideas, and she's like, I can't remember him at the grocery store. I'll look when I get home. So I just rewind the audiobook, and I hear Tom, and I'm like, you'd think I would have remembered that.
Right? Excuse me. Oh, but, so my question.
Mm-hmm.
In chapter 21, after Henry, Tom, and Julia make it back to Henry's house, Tom says a thing on page 217. He insinuates that he feels like he knows Julia. Where does he know Julia from? And then this makes me think the author is insinuating that in a past life, Julia was Rose and Tom was Norris. What do you think?
Yeah, that's absolutely what she was insinuating. And we know that because Rose sees the portrait of Dr. Grenville. Is that how you say his name?
Dr. Grenville, the young Grenville.
Because I was listening to it and not reading it, I had Dr. Grendel in my notes. So Dr. Grenville, it's a portrait of him from when he was like around Norris's age. Well, spoiler alert, Norris is actually his biological son.
Right, and then later, when at the end we see the portrait again through Julia and Henry's eyes, and they're like, holy shit, that's Tom.
Right. But it makes sense because Meggie was also Dr. Grenville's daughter.
Right, and they're related to Meggie in this long line.
This is, Norris is Maggie's, 4 or 5 great something or other.
Right. Norris was her sibling.
Norris was her sibling. Right. But so what they're saying is that Norris looked like Dr. Grenville, and so then generations down the road, it's
right. Well, everybody's going to always look like Dr. Grenville eventually.
Right.
All roads lead back to the whore. Homeboy couldn't keep it in his pants. Let's not lie.
Oh my gosh. I was not expecting that.
So everything leading up to the amputation of Charles's arm, forearm, right? They amputate his forearm area. It's really sad. There's so much going on here, from the emotions of everyone in the room and how crude
Hang on. I'm sorry. Can we just go back to the question we were just talking about?
Yeah, sorry.
Because here's the weird thing that just popped into my head. If Tom is several generations Grenville later, and Julia is Rose, then Maggie is related to both of them. So they're distantly cousins.
Yay, science! We're all slightly related. Isn't that like genetically? I mean, what happened? I mean, they're all from Boston. It has to happen, right?
I don't know. My family was immigrated here when my grandfather was a kid. So, and Tom's half Mari. So
Tom's half what? I'm sorry. Say that again.
Mari. He's not half Mari. He's fourth, I think, or third.
Oh, okay.
I don't know math. His grandmother was Mari.
Okay.
So I don't think we're related.
See, my family, everyone has a version of this face. Piper has this face. My mom has this face. My grandmother had this face. Her mother had this face. If somebody has this face, I know we're related. It's the only way I know.
Yeah, well, Molly, I'm still pretty convinced that we are related.
I mean, you do have this face. It's just a different variation of this face.
That's a good point.
I have eyebrows.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. That just occurred to me. And actually, it occurred to me while I was listening to it, too. And that was one of the reasons why I was like, okay, this was dumb. So basically, you did this whole thing.
Feels like lazy writing to you?
Well, I don't know. I guess. I don't know that I would define it as lazy writing. It just seems unnecessary.
Gotcha.
Like several different generations later, we found each other again in our ancestors, but like you're related to each other at this point, so that's gross.
But it's so diluted. I think it's okay. They're not like second cousins. They're like 18th cousins. God bless you. I made you sneeze. Look at that. Companion.
Okay, so now we need to talk about Mexican Gothic again, because now you have justified incest.
No, it's different.
And I'm just not sure what to do anymore. I'm not sure where we're going.
It's different. Like, geneticists have said, there is a good chance most people on this planet are related somehow. Genetically. So, avoiding being, like, what are people...
Okay, but they don't need to be related in the same book.
But what I'm saying is this is different from Mexican Gothic. What I'm saying is what are you going to do? Like, have everybody take genetic tests before they date? Like,
I don't
preventative?
I don't know. Aren't there states that require that, though? Okay, we're getting way off topic.
Wait, sorry. Okay, moving on.
Sorry,
Let's go to Charles's amputation, shall we?
Yeah.
Everything leading up to this is really sad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Charles is hiding his injury. There's just so much going on. Like, there's downstairs, upstairs stuff going on at the house. Mm-hmm. And from the emotions of everyone in the room to how crude the actual amputation is, mm-hmm. the whole scene is wild, right? And my strong stomach, who can handle this medical stuff, got queasy from it.
Yeah, it didn't.
How did you feel about the scene?
It didn't sit well with me either. I think, so Charles wasn't great at medicine, but since his uncle was like this great doctor, his uncle was pushing him into medicine. And I almost feel like the infection that he got made him ashamed. Like, I can't be a good doctor if I'm going to get these infections while I'm trying to dissect somebody. Right. And then also, I think part of him knew that if he let it go, he could get out of medicine.
Right. And then when they're like trying to cut us, and then when they're like about to do the amputation, he's like, "Uncle, I'll never be a doctor if you do this." Like, he puts it back on him. It's really sad. Right. And like at the end, we learn he died of syphilis from being like this big romantic poet.
Yeah. Gross.
I just thought it was funny that this man
was he based on a real person? Like,
I think so. I think so.
Keep asking questions.
So the death of Eben comes as no surprise, I feel, to the readers. But we get the voice in the POV of the first time of the West End Reaper for this quick interaction. Do you at this point know who the Reaper is or have an idea? Did you make an assumption during that little thing?
I mean, I legit thought that that the West End Reaper was Charles.
Right, Charles.
I mean, I thought that for most of the book. I thought his aversion to it doesn't look like it
Charles Lackaway was real.
Oh, Lackaway was his last name. Okay.
Lackaway.
I thought that his aversion to it was kind of an act, and that he actually was more murdery than he wanted to let on. It doesn't seem like it's based on a real person. I'll do more research, and if it is based on a real person, I'll put a link. But
Okay.
I think it. I thought his aversion to it was more like, I mean, I don't know how to explain it, but I just thought like medically. Oh, okay. I'll use myself as an example. Not that I'm a
Okay.
murderer. I don't like medical stuff.
Currently.
It really grosses me out. I don't like the descriptions of it, but I love to watch bones and see all that grossness. And I'll be like sitting there eating my breakfast cereal and like, what's going on there? Like, and that doesn't bother me. So I feel like that's what it was to me. Like, he didn't like the medical stuff, but he could certainly murder someone.
Right.
I'm not a murderer. I feel like
being that at this point we already have had the mysterious British dude, right, come for Eben, and the mysterious British dude then also talked to Rose, and I knew that in my mind, I was like, oh, this guy is being hired by Dr. Grenville. That was my assumption, right? Like, I was like, Dr. Grenville hired this guy.
You thought that?
Yeah, I thought Dr. Grenville had hired this guy. I think he was just cleaning messes up, right? And so I was like, oh, Grenville's doing this. So I thought it was the uncle. I thought it was the old dude killing people.
Well, that made sense too, because I couldn't figure out where Charles would get the money to hire the guy. But right. I kind of thought maybe the uncle was involved in that part.
Yeah.
But I really thought Charles was the murderer. It's a nice twist that it was his mom.
Right.
I sort of don't believe it. I mean, she had the knowledge base.
Her dad was a doctor. Her brother's a doctor. Her husband was a doctor. It all lines up that she would have the knowledge. And
Does it though?
It made sense to me.
They talk explicitly about how it had to be someone that had experience with butchering as well.
Right. Well, maybe she worked in the kitchen a little bit.
And we never got an example. We never got an answer for why everything was like in the shape of a cross. Like why it was specifically that.
Because her brother was a dirty, dirty bastard and having children out of wedlock.
Oh, I forgot that murder fixes that problem.
You don't know her life. So let's move on. Norris's father is heartbreaking and cruel simultaneously.
Yeah.
Do you think? Okay, so at this point, when we're at the farm with Rose and everything, we don't know anything that has happened to Norris's mother at all.
We think she's in Paris.
We think she's in Paris, or we're told she's in Paris. Do you think by the way the father's acting and the way he talks about this note and how he couldn't read and he had one of the neighbors read it for him, do you think she's dead? Or do you think,
I thought it was strange.
What did you think?
I thought it was strange that she left Norris while he was sick, and that her excuse for doing it was because he deserved better. But then I also thought, well, maybe she just had, like, there are moms, let's use the example from Fangirl. She just thought she was a bad mom and couldn't handle it, so she left. Right. I don't know. I really didn't think she was dead. I thought she was hanging out in Paris and doing her thing, you know? I think that the reason that Norris's dad was the man that he was because he was broken. Like, he was broken from what happened. He felt like they had love and that they had this relationship, and then all of a sudden she was just gone.
Disappeared. Yeah.
And I don't think that it's not Norris's fault, but how do you look at somebody who's a product of that relationship when you're grieving? I mean, he's grieving the loss of his wife, of the relationship with his wife. He's also trying to take care of a kid, and I don't think he ever bounced back. So it was like a lot, you know?
Yeah.
I don't feel sorry for him because you shouldn't treat your kids like dirt, and he did treat Norris like dirt. But then I also feel bad for him because we find out that, in fact, she hadn't left, but, you know.
Right.
So he actually ended up thinking the worst of his wife, forever.
Which saddest part of this whole thing is we finally figure out when the house is built that the house that used to be there before was burnt down. It was burned.
Right.
And
it was Dr. Grenville's summer home.
Right. And Norris's mother had went there to get help because her son was sick. And Eliza ended up killing her. So we learned that the body in the garden was Norris's mom. The saddest part of this whole thing, they never get closure or know that it was her. Right? Nobody knows. Eliza...
Well, Rose figures it out because she hears... was it Rose that figured it out, or was it Dr.?
Yeah, well, Rose said that, like, she was tired. Because Eliza was yelling at Charles to go back in the house when they were loading the...
Right. She said, Rose overhears I did this 10 years ago, too.
Right. And I cleaned up my brother's messes. I have a whole, like, question about it. I cleaned up my brother's messes before. And so...
She was much more murdery this time, though.
Yeah. Yeah. It's too many witnesses, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So then, as we're at the farm, the Night's Watch come, and they take Norris. Why do you think she picked Norris as a setup? Like, why do you think the Reaper was like, you know what?
Well, there was already speculation that he was involved, and there was already all these biases surrounding him, that he was a farm boy trying to live in a gentleman's world.
Right.
He was an easy target. Target.
Bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, that's all it was. The Night Watch already had their biases. The community already had their biases. So it made sense.
Yeah. I mean, and a third prong to that is, eventually someone's going to figure out that he's freaking Dr. Grenville's kid. He looks just like him, right?
Well, nobody seemed to, know that, probably because of how old Dr. Grenville was at the time.
Until Rose saw that damn picture.
I mean, it's always easier to blame the outsider, right?
Right.
He's the outsider in their community, so it's a lot easier to blame him.
Right. So let's jump into let's talk about Eliza and Dr. Grenville, and then I'll jump into a few more questions I have.
Okay.
So Dr. Grenville's obviously a whore. He keeps knocking people up, right? And his sister even says to her son, keep having to clean up your uncle's messes.
Okay, but he's only done that. I mean, he's only knocked up 2 women.
That we know of.
Well, no, he was pretty certain that was it. Like, he had a relationship with Norris's mom while he was still married.
Right.
And then after his wife was deceased, then it was Arnia. So there weren't other women in there. It was just those 2.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's true. It just feels whorish behavior for the times, huh?
Don't slut shame
him. Don't kink shame the birds. But I mean, we had no clue it was Eliza until this whole scene. There was no clue, right?
Nothing.
And her behavior, she's saying it's to protect Charles.
She wants to protect the money, not Charles.
Right. Well, Charles's inheritance, right? Because her husband was poor. Like, you had no clue, right? That it was Eliza?
Yeah. I didn't, no. But I will say, even after that was the resolution, I sort of felt like it didn't make sense.
Right.
Like, it was a good twist, I guess, but it didn't make sense to me. She's not described as that big of a woman, and she's murdered. At least at this time, we have a body count of 5?
Right.
2 nurses, a prostitute, the doctor, and then Norris's mom. So that's 5. And then Eden, so 6.
And Dim Billy.
Yeah, but at that point, it hadn't happened yet.
Right.
So 6, and then she killed Billy and tried to kill Rose.
Right.
So, I mean, like, she already had 6 body counts before the end of the book when we find out that she's the murderer. And I just didn't really buy it. Like, to me, it wasn't, I mean, it was a good twist because I didn't expect her, but it just seemed unlikely. Like, she's a serial killer, essentially.
Yeah, she is a serial killer.
I mean,
She's definitely the Reaper.
That wasn't a term at the time, serial killer, but she's a serial killer.
Right.
So, I don't know. I don't know. I will say I liked that the counter side to her, the murdery woman that she was. The other side of that is Dr. Grenville. Okay, sure, he impregnated 2 women out of wedlock, but he was also an abolitionist. He's a part of this great group of people who are basically running running the Underground Railroad.
Yep.
Like, they are physicians who are trying to make things better.
And, like, people in laws, like, right? Because the constable was there.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of really, like, important people who were doing this. And Dr. Grenville wasn't, like, there was another doctor that was kind of an ass. That, like, whatever he said... like,
Watchman Pratt.
No, not officer. Sorry, doctor. There was another doctor. The one that died. I can't remember his name.
Oh, I can't either. Oh, wait. Dr. Sewell?
Yeah, so he was kind of an ass. Like, he knew everything and nobody else knew anything. And he's the one that, like, basically killed Arnia inadvertently. Yeah. Whereas Dr. Grenville, he was, like, a good guy. I mean, okay, questionable morals in some ways, but he was, like, a good guy. Like, he was trying to make the world better.
And he was trying to do what he thought was best.
Yeah, and then his sister's a murderer. So it's just a interesting other side, you know.
You can do everything right and have a good kid and a bad kid. So Oliver Wendell Holmes pieces this all together, right? And the only reason he pieces this all together is because of the chatty freaking sisters, right?
Yep.
And...
well, he doesn't piece together that Norris is also Grenville's son.
But he figured out Arnia was the girl.
Right.
Right? And he starts doing mental math and he's like, oh, shit.
Yeah, that's... and he thinks that Grenville is the West End Reaper. Like, that's what he thinks. And I think that was a good misdirection. Like, I was like, oh, so it's not Charles. It is Dr. Grenville. Right. You get that misdirection and then, boom, it turns out it's the sister. Right. But...
so, we get several hints that Julia is Rose. Like, or from a past life, right? Because she's having the dreams, and I know, but then, like, Tom tells her, new rule, what would Rose do? Do you feel like this motto is necessary, or do you feel like it's just an needed? I felt it was unneeded, right? Like,
it was unneeded. I felt like their whole story was unneeded, like, all of it.
I feel like we could have just had Tom and what the hell's the grandpa? Not the grandpa.
Henry,
the great nephew. Henry and Tom just be related to Maggie some way and be fine. But to make them be like these long lost lovers and like...
yeah, it was ridiculous.
I didn't feel like we needed that storyline.
No, we didn't.
We didn't need it at all.
And it was okay. And it was okay for them to still fall for each other, but it still didn't need to be... they were like basically the reincarnation of Norris and Rose. That was ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
So, final thoughts.
I was super sad when Norris died, though.
Yeah. Yeah. It was upsetting. That and Dim Billy. Like, poor Billy.
Yeah.
He was super in love with Rose and like...
well, and she tried to kill him before, but because Eben came along, Eben came along.
E-B-E-N.
Yeah, Eben. She killed him first. But yeah, I mean, I felt sort of bad about Billy dying because, like, that was pointless. Like, nobody needed to murder that kid.
And he was so scared of fire. Like, that poor child. He was traumatized. I mean, and he was obviously, you know...
but that was another story that didn't need to be included in this. It had absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the story.
The whole thing with being scared of fire?
Yeah, that's dumb. My final thought on this is that while I really enjoyed the book, there were elements that I didn't see coming, but in a bad way. So I didn't see it coming who the murderer was. So that was interesting. But the whole Rose and Norris thing, them being Julia and Tom in a new life or
Felt
whatever.
unnecessary.
It was stupid. It was not necessary at all. You could have them fall in love as they were doing the discovery of this story and realizing that these characters are like them.
Right.
I also want to point out, we didn't talk about Tom a great deal, but Tom is a doctor as well.
But he travels.
He's an infectious disease doctor.
Yeah.
So he travels a lot for that, which I thought that was a great throwback to Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes, because that was basically what he discovered, which was that, you need to clean your hands to stop spreading infection.
Right.
And then we also didn't talk about this, but it turns out that Maggie in her adult life becomes one of the first female doctors.
Yes.
Which is really cool.
I liked that.
Yeah, and I mean, basically, that family is just a long line of doctors, essentially, what it happens.
Right.
So I think that's really
cool. Which happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I still, my biggest criticism is I could do without the modern day story at all.
Really?
I don't need it at
all. Liked having Julia there. I liked Julia and Henry's relationship, I feel like it was very cliche for her to be a divorcee, right? Like, oh, woe is me. She couldn't just be a woman remodeling a house. This was in 2006, I want to say? 2007?
That's more modern than I thought.
2007.
That's more modern than I thought it was. I thought maybe it was the 90s, and then that made more sense to me because, in the 90s, there were a lot of newly single women, and this would be a genre that generation of women would have picked up. So
2007.
I don't know them.
It felt unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, overall, I really liked the book. I actually, so I rate all my books on Goodreads. So if you all want to see my ratings, you can find me on Goodreads. Go ahead. I keep that public. So that's not really a private look into my life. But I rated it 4 out of 5. So
that's a big damn deal. I got another book I brought to April, and she actually liked it, guys.
Yeah, I don't
win sound.
Yeah, I'm really critical of the books that I rate because I don't just throw 5s out there. Like, I really am very critical. And even books that I really like usually end up being 3 stars instead of 4. I gave it 4 out of 5, and I would have gotten the 5 if it would have just focused on the West End Reaper part of the story. That would have been enough for me.
We can put your link to your Goodread actually.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can do that. Because like I said, if you want to follow me on Goodreads, that is a public facing page for me. And I do rate every book I'm reading.
I have not updated my Goodreads since 2010. So
I like the to set a goal for myself and then accomplish that goal. Like, my goal this year was 35 because the book club that you and I run was 30, and I just wanted to have 5 more books than that. And I am currently at 59 books for 2021.
You're welcome.
It is 100% because of Book Besties.
You're welcome.
100%. And that doesn't include any of the picture books that I read. As a children's librarian, I read a lot of picture books, and I don't count those. But yeah, I mean, feel free.
But I'm an ADHD kid with attention problems.
Yeah, but feel free. I mean, we can put my link. That's fine. That one's not any of my. Yeah, that's not any of my personal information. I get to have a private life, and I don't count Goodreads as that. So
because it's a public site, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it. Next week, what do we got next week? Next week
we are reading. Let me make sure that I'm not wrong about this, but I believe we are reading an absolutely remarkable thing. Yes, and so I have it here. And look,
my soul buddy.
If you are looking online, April is tabbing. April is tabbing.
Molly's so screwed.
This is actually my third reading of this book, so I'm tabbing things that I know are important later. So there are things that you wouldn't pick up on necessarily in the first read. But we are reading An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is book 1 in the Carl series. There are 2 books in the Carl series. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing is book 1, and book 2 is A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor. I love the titles of both of those. I think they're just very Hank Green and very brilliant.
Very Hank.
And we are going to be going back to alternating hosts. So next week I'm hosting, and then we'll
Yes, please. It's the week after that. Which, if you are playing the home game, folks, and you are tagging along with us, I highly recommend the audiobook of Yes,
Please. Yes, the audiobook of Yes, Please. I highly
recommend it.
Yes.
She has
Amy Poehler.
Yeah, sorry. Let's Amy Poehler's Yes, Please. She has not just reading the book herself. She also has like her friends who she talks about in this book in there, which is so good.
It's really a great audiobook, and it's won like a ton of awards. So if you're an audiobook fan,
if you need a laugh, that book hits the funny bone hard.
I started it again this morning while I was getting ready for church, and I was already laughing, and I hadn't even made it out of the intro yet.
Had me in tears the first time I heard it.
So anyway, we're going to go back to alternating hosts, and we will be posting on social media. I create graphics that show for the month what we'll be doing, and those will be pinned to the top of Facebook. So if you're trying to, get your reading list, your TBR together to follow along with us, or you're trying to get the books from the library or whatever you're trying to do, look at the top of the Facebook page where you have a pinned post that tells you what we're reading that month. And that should probably go up this week because this is the last week of Spooky Month.
Yeah.
And again, we've said this before, but we know that we are reading at our own pace, and we don't necessarily expect you to keep up with that pace, but please come back after you've read the book.
Please.
Or if you're like Nurse Katie and you don't mind spoilers, then just go ahead and listen to us anyway.
Because you know what? We've stopped giving spoiler warnings.
Yeah, we're not doing that anymore.
No.
So
unless you're an author who would really like us to preview your book and give an honest review before it is published, we'll be more than happy to do that. We would love to get some art, and we'd love to, have author guests, especially for, first-time authors. We'd love that. I don't count. Rude.
We can read your book if you want, Molly, but I think you're gonna have a very strong opinion in the pro column because you're the writer. So
it was a joke. It was a reach. It was a really rough reach.
And rolling into December, we are doing 2 episodes on Harry Potter. So I will have finished Harry Potter by then.
And also, don't forget to email us if you have suggestions or questions you want to add to the Harry Potter dialogue, because April's going to have all the feelings. I'm going to hear this all day. So let's just... if you're not already following us on social media, please do, because we will be posting a Q&A comment section, like where you can ask us questions. We're going to do an episode that's like Ask the Book Besties. So that'll be coming up as well. So definitely follow us on social media. I mean, we've had a blast with this. We've been doing this since June, and it's November. So I'm almost November. So we've been doing pretty well, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. So don't forget to rate us. Subscribe, follow, all those things. Share. And share. Rating us helps boost the pod up in the pod sphere. Yeah, so like the algorithm that decides what people are recommended, we need to be boosted. So help us out. I think that's it. Let us know in the comments if you want merch. Somebody suggested we get merch, and we're like, do we have enough people that would want that? But let us know if you're and tell us what you want on the merch. We've already had a request for everyone needs an emotional support Johnny Depp. I think we should have a bell as our symbol too. Thank you, Katie, for our bells. And call it Nurse Katie on it or something. Oh, man. All right, right, that's it, folks. We'll see you next week.
Yep.
Bye.
Next week for an absolutely remarkable thing. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us on Book Besties. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The views discussed here are those of Molly and April, not those of anybody else. Today's book was Bone Gardens by Tess Gerritsen. Your book besties are Molly Biggs and April Watkins. Editing by Thomas Watkins, and music is Halloween Pumpkin from purpletechplanet.com. Don't forget to follow Book Besties on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. If you'd like to contact the Book Besties, please email us at bookbestiespod@gmail.com.